Hello, North Country. Welcome back for another episode of Why Waite Innovate. We are here with the 44th installment of North Volume's latest and greatest podcast. My name is Matthew Waite. I will be your host for the next hour or so. For those of you new to North Volume and Why Waite Innovate, welcome. Thanks for joining us. The tag here at Why Waite Innovate is to highlight and amplify voices of North Country activists, artists, innovators working to move our region forward. We have with us today one of those very individuals, Mr. Tenzin Dorje. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So this is one of those ones where I'm kind of kicking myself that we didn't do this a little earlier. We're here at episode 44, but Tenzin Dorje, for those who may not be familiar with Tenzin, he is the owner and proprietor of a couple North Country businesses, restaurants, specifically Himalaya Restaurant in downtown Plattsburgh, 78 Margaret Street, as well as Cafe Himalaya, which is up there in West Shazy, right off of Route 9. He's also the lead organizer, in the annual Tibetan Arts and Culture Festival. And in fact, Mountain Lake PBS produced an excellent documentary called Arts in Exile, which came out a couple years ago, in which Tenzin is featured. So we'll obviously get into that great stuff. But before we do, we want to learn a little bit more about Mr. Dorje. So Tenzin, welcome, and tell us a little bit about where you're from.
Thanks for having me again. I mean, I was born and brought up in Bhutan, which is, I think, one of the smallest countries in the world, and the population is about 750,000 people. And Bhutan is, I'm proud to be a Bhutanese because Bhutan is the only carbon negative country in the world.
No kidding. All right.
So that is the only country that's carbon negative. I think Bhutan produces about 1.5 million tons of carbon, in a year, but it absorbs about 6 million tons. So that's carbon negative, and that's happening because of, Bhutan has, right now, I believe it's about 70% is covered by forests. And it's, when Bhutan became a democracy back in 2008, it's, it's written in the constitution that, 60% of Bhutan will always be forested. And
yeah, my main guess on the way you do that is the forest, right? As
Yep.
far as carbon neutral. So
Yep.
that's fascinating, and I believe a beautiful area. So just for our listeners who may not be familiar with Bhutan, I have to admit, even doing pretty well in geography in high school, I had to take out the old map and take a closer look. Bhutan is, I don't know if nestled is the right word, but placed between China and India, two huge cultures. India, obviously a subcontinent. And then on the west and the east, I believe, buttressed by Nepal and Bangladesh. So a mountainous area, I believe, or at least right at the, if you could call it the foothills of the largest mountain range in the world, the Himalayas.
Yep, it is on the foothills. It's, Bhutan, in terms of its geography, has very less plain areas compared to the mountainous regions we have. And I think even the amount of land that is used for agriculture purposes would maybe less than 10%. So it is a place where we have snow 365 days a year, but you see the snow up in the mountains, not on the foothills. So it's in terms of its greenery, it's very similar to the Adirondacks, but in terms of the extreme weather, we don't have that much of snow, or it's not even, not as cold as it gets here. So, but in the summer, you can pretty much say it's very, very similar.
Yeah, well, just coming in here, I was. We're going to date the show a little bit, but it's winter here in Plattsburgh, as it is 6 months out of the year, and we're dealing with a little bit of snow today. And I was like, are you used to getting the snow in the mountains? And I kind of assumed yes, but you said, well, no, not nearly as much. So, how different is the topography and the living conditions? Is there any difference living at altitude? It's probably 14,000 or how
Well,
high
I
is
mean, I believe, I think the average elevation where a majority of the population lives would be about 8,000 and above.
Okay, much less than I
Much
thought.
less than
Okay.
40, yeah. But I mean, there are places, districts within the country that are at, even above 14,000. So there are there are places that are pretty high up. But on an average, I would say a majority of the population lives around about 8,000
Okay.
above sea level. Yeah.
And what kind of industries are there? Is tourism a big industry?
Well, tourism is a big industry in Bhutan. Tourism, and most of the farmers are like subsistence farming. They live off their land. Tourism, Bhutan has been very wise in how it's regulated tourism coming into the country, and they allow only an X number of tourists every year, which is based on the infrastructure that is there to support that amount of tourists.
Okay.
And I think they learned from the mistakes of some of our neighboring countries where, they allowed any number of tourists, backpackers, campers, anything. And, along with that comes a lot of, problems with that. Not to go into details, but
I can. No. I mean, Nepal, right?
Yep.
Obviously, the big mountain there.
Yep. Mount Everest.
Mount Everest.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of. I think it's HBO Sports did a really interesting piece on what's going on up there and the trash and the defecation and everything, and it's becoming kind of a health hazard, and obviously when you have that much traffic on something like Mount Everest, which is a dangerous place to be. I mean, there's some really dangerous things going on. So it sounds like Bhutan's taking a much more sustainable, long-term approach rather than just trying to bring everyone in there, get the tourism dollars now, and damn the torpedoes if in 10 years it's something that is no longer sustainable.
Well, I mean, the thing is, in Bhutan, what they measure, they measure their development by, and they go by what they call the gross national happiness index, not the GDP index.
Right.
And the 4 pillars of the gross national happiness index is first and foremost good governance. It's very important. I mean, anywhere in the world, if you don't have a good government, is where all the problems start coming from.
We're starting to see that here.
Yeah, it is coming. Seems to be, and then you have very very wise and sustainable socio-economic development, and that's one of the key elements also. And then when I was talking about the carbon negative, the Bhutan being the only carbon negative country in the world, it's because they take care of the environment, and it is the belief of all Bhutanese people, and even a lot Tibetan people. I mean, as a Buddhist, we believe in the well-being of all sentient beings. So when you take care of the environment, we believe that the environment gives back to you. So Bhutan bases all its progress based on these pillars, and so they've made like wise choices in terms of Bhutan exports a lot of hydroelectricity, and it's mostly funded by the Indian government in loans or grants or whatever. But that same electricity is exported back to India. And now in the past, I think 7 or 8 years, they have started providing free electricity to villagers. Because in the past, they used to use firewood for cooking. So to cut that down, the government provides free electricity or very, very marginal subsidized electricity. So everybody's using electricity and electrical equipment to cook. So
that's fascinating. I mean, I'm obviously chuckling here a little bit because we're in the United States. We seem to be having this debate about oil and the future of the way we handle that resource. And Bhutan is even doing that with wood, which is kind of fascinating to me. But I love all of this, and I just wanted to point out that difference between the gross national happiness, something to that extent, versus gross national product. I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense to me because you ultimately, I think you want your community to be healthy and happy, right? And whether or not you're rich or poor is kind of an ancillary issue, I would think. I would, if I were, running the country, and we'll see someday, but probably not. It would seem to make sense to try and tailor a little bit more on happiness than economic reasons. Because to my point, I mean, one of the things I always talk about with the environment is, I talk about oil. If we end up going down the path that we seem to be going with global warming and climate change, we could have the wealthiest. The United States could be the wealthiest society in the history of the world, but if our cities are crumbling in Miami and New Orleans, and they're falling into the ocean in New York City and Boston, some of the scary stuff you see. I mean, even the U.S. government, I believe, came out recently and said, "Hey, take a look at climate change. It could cost us millions. Economic development." I mean, we're starting to see climate change being among one of the more existential threats that this country and even humans are facing. So I think that Bhutan seems to very clearly be onto something here. So maybe we can learn a little bit from our.
Well, I believe there's a group in Vermont somewhere that they are actually studying the principles of GNH and seeing if that can be, if they can adapt it here. I know they're doing that in Europe. Certain countries in Europe have actually visited Bhutan, and they're studying the model and bringing it back and seeing where they can work with it. I mean, it's and global warming. Although we have climate change deniers, Bhutan is a prime example of how global warming, how pollution in our neighboring countries has an adverse effect on our country, because we have glaciers. And those glaciers, when it bursts, the dams burst, they can cause havoc.
Yeah.
They wreak havoc, yeah. So Bhutan is, has done a lot in terms of remaining carbon negative, and they're still, they're still further progressing towards that, where they're bringing in electric vehicles instead of, I think they have set a goal to have electric vehicles by 2030, I think.
Yeah, great.
No fossil fuel use in the country at all. And everything that is farmed within the country will be, I think it's 2020 is when they said that everything is going to be organic, 100% organic. So these are good things that are happening in Bhutan, and I think the West can learn a lot from there.
Yeah, that's well stated, because I think there's an ignorance over here in the United States and the Western in general that we're kind of at the forefront of innovation and society and civilization, where I think that's a lot misplaced and I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from other people, and it looks like Bhutan is one of those places we should be looking at. On the note of education, I'm of course interested in what the education is like in Bhutan. So how long were you there, and what level of education did you achieve?
Well, I didn't go to school in Bhutan. I mean, I went to school in India.
Okay.
I went to a boarding school in India, but the education system in Bhutan is as modern as it can get. There are hardships that are being faced by students in remote areas, but other than that, it's a very modern education system. And what Bhutan lacks in terms of, areas of education that are not available in Bhutan, the government actually sends students out all over the world, give them scholarships, train them, and bring them back. And in the last 2 decades, 3 decades, there's been an immense progress in the education system, and it's the good thing that the government believes, and especially the king believes, that education is the key to the success and the sovereignty of the country. So that is something that is like a key goal of all governments out there, to have a more educated population. Now, the other thing on the other side...
I hope so. I mean, I'm looking at today's, current administration here in the United States, and I wish I could say the same, but I'm questioning that, which is, I think, terrible. But that's a whole other discussion. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll leave that there, and we'll come back to that in another show.
Another show. I mean, it's what I would like to say about the not only the education system in Bhutan, but I think it's the knowledge that people share, the knowledge that people have, because. I personally believe that ignorance and denial is the root of all problems. And in Bhutan, even if you go and speak to a villager who has had no formal education, that villager will give you lessons in life. Lessons that will, take your ignorance away. So this is the thing that I believe we are lacking in the West. We blindly follow certain trends and certain, what would you call it now? Cults.
Yeah. We have one of those.
Yes.
He's the president right now. I mean, again, I don't want to make this all about him, because as we talked about at the beginning, I think there's a problem in doing that. I think he's more of a symptom than anything else. I think he kind of saw that the country was sick in a number of different ways, and I'm going to probably annoy a lot of people, but ignorant in many ways. And he exploited that. And I think it's fascinating what you're talking about, because I think some of our listeners know that I've been I've been dabbling a little bit more in philosophy recently, because I think because of a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, I'm kind of questioning a lot of the things. And I watched a very fascinating debate. I just told Jeremiah Ward about this over the weekend between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. And both, I think, neuroscientists, both scientists. Sam Harris certainly a neuroscientist. Jordan Peterson is a Toronto professor. And essentially, the debate really was around religion and kind of the utility moving forward and even looking back. And I think one of the points that Sam Harris made, which was really important, I found, was the distinction between the West and the East. And it was very clear that in the West, we seem to have this very clear, almost story-like religion of good versus evil, of it's very clear good versus evil. And Sam Harris made an interesting observation, which you seem to be hitting on very succinctly, and that's that, well, in Buddhism and a lot of the place Hinduism in the West, there's not necessarily a good versus evil. It's the good is good acts and good works and intelligence and knowledge, and evil is ignorance and denial, and the thing is exactly what you're talking about. And it does seem to be kind of a difference there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the way I see it, I mean, like I said, I went to a school in India, which was a British school, and it was a Christian school. It was a Protestant school. So, and I can tell you and your listeners that I have been to church more times than you'll ever go in 1 or 2 lifetimes. So it is 7 days a week, 10 and a half months a year. Every day.
Yeah.
Half an hour Monday.
That's
through
commitment.
Monday through Saturday, half an hour, 3 hours every Sunday. And that we did for 15 years. So that's a lot of things. And to us, it did not make a difference that we were going to a Christian school, although I am born a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Jew or a Muslim. It made no difference to us because we went to the church for its spirituality, for its goodness. We did not judge, like you said, evil is bad and good is doing the good thing. We did not have those judgmental thoughts. We went there, we loved singing hymns, we loved singing carols, we loved reciting the prayers because it came from a pure heart. And when it comes from a pure heart, and if you look at any religion, no religion tells you to hate each other.
Yeah, that's true.
No religion says spread hate.
I think the problem that came up in the debate that you have is certainly places like the Old Testament, which have very, very specific references about things that you do to people, like who don't wash their hands before they eat pork or shellfish, or if a woman was not a virgin on her wedding day, then you would have to stone that person. I mean, that's where you run into those problems, right? Of the text and the script being so specific and illicit that there's no other way to interpret that. But anyway, we could get a whole debate about that. But are you a practicing Christian then?
Well, I wouldn't call myself practicing anything. I'm a person who's and I have a lot of friends like me who we went to school together. We've been to churches, mosques, monasteries. You name it, we've been there, synagogues, everything. And although I'm at home, I practice Buddhism, all the rituals of Buddhism, which is how I've been been born into. I wasn't brought up that way, but I was brought up as a Christian, although I'm not a practicing Christian. But I believe in the spiritual side of all religions. More than the religion itself. I think, the spiritual side of the religion, the philosophical side of it, because that brings out the goodness in everything. And if you can interpret that in the right way, then, we can spread the message of compassion.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully stated. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, I've talked a little bit, even on Facebook recently, I was raised Roman Catholic, but I've kind of moved away from the church for a lot of reasons. I mean, certainly the sexual abuse scandal didn't help, right? In the way that the church responded to that. Yeah. But I think you're right that spiritualism and faith are very powerful things, and almost invariably can be very positive things. And certainly in this world where, there's a lot of stuff, almost everything we don't understand, right? And part of being knowledgeable and wise is knowing what you don't know, and we don't know a lot of things. So,
and the thing is, if you have a good teacher, that you follow. And if it is somebody like I follow His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it doesn't mean I have to have blind faith in every word he says. And he doesn't want that either. He says, I can tell you one thing, but you should question it yourself and find out for yourself. Now, in the West, what we have, again, going back to that same word again, it's kind of like a cult-like following. We blindly follow the preachings of a preacher. We have these mega churches. These guys are flying around in jets, driving Rolls Royce and Bentleys, and have these humongous multi-million-dollar mansions. And the people who are actually giving these guys the money are the ones who don't have it. So that is called like blind faith, and that is a cult following, you know, and that is something that I am totally against. And no religion teaches you that. No religion dictates that to you. And I think it's time for people to ask those questions and, you know, not have blind faith.
Yeah, no, very well stated. I mean, one of the things that just, I'm thinking of a few years ago in Houston, there was that mega church pastor who, when the floods happened, the doors were closed, right? People were homeless.
Yep.
And it's that disconnect, that cult following. I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to solve it today, but there's certainly a disconnect in a lot of the West that I see, and I'm sure in some of the East as well. But
well, there's definitely even in the East, and you have cult followings, you have all these different teachers and gurus, and and none of it is good. I mean, I can be very honest and say that it's not good. I mean, somebody who demands absolute loyalty and absolute followers to his words and said that's not good.
We've got one of those again.
Yeah, those again.
But I think we're on the same page in a lot of the things, and I think it's very well stated. I did want to move a little bit, maybe through your education and how you came here, because I do obviously want to talk about the restaurant and cuisine. So can you talk a little bit about when you started becoming interested in cuisine, your travels, and then ultimately there's a lot to go through here, but ultimately, what brought you to food?
Well, I've always been, I didn't study food as culinary as such. I mean, I always worked in the IT industry, which is what my education is in. But I've always been somebody who's always been interested in food, because I went to this school where we were from all different parts of the world. I mean, at one stage, but later it was all India, but it was all different parts of India. And we visited our friends during our breaks and stuff like that. And, you get to eat different kinds of food. So I've always been very experimental, very, if there was something that I saw, I wanted to try and make it. And so it's always been an interest.
Very curious.
Very, very curious about food. I love food. I mean, more than eating, I love, making food, cooking food. I mean, and what drew me to it was drew me to the. I mean, when I was in India, I had these internet cafes. I had restaurants also, and what I liked about the industry is the interaction that I have with my customers. I love speaking to people because the more I speak to them, the more I learn about them, and that is knowledge. I mean, every day in the restaurant, I'm learning something new. Somebody will say something, someone will say something, and we share. I mean, they ask me about where I am from, what I do, and they learn things from me, about me, but then they learn something about Bhutan, or they learn something about India or some other country that I've visited. So this is like the most interesting aspect of it. And as the years go by, your customers become your friends, and they become your family. So the concept of a restaurant, since we started, my wife and I started a restaurant back in 1995 in India, we've always made it a point to make the food as we would make for our family members. Because ultimately, we want our customers to be a part of our family. And in Plattsburgh, I am so glad to say that I have a huge family. It's a lot of people ask me, oh, your summers must be better than your winters must be slow. No, I'm not, because my support base is local. And whatever tourists I get in the summer or the winter, whether they come for skiing or whether they come visiting in the summer, it's kind of like that's the the icing on the cake. I mean, I already have my cake, that's just the icing. So, over the years that Yangchen and I have had the restaurant here, we've made some of the best friends that we've had. And as far as the community is concerned, we love our community. I mean, it's a place that, we see ourselves retiring, see ourselves getting old, and one fine day, leaving Earth from here. So
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Because so I believe the restaurant. Let's talk about that. You opened it, I believe, in 2010.
Yep.
And that was right on the heels of another big change in your life. You had, and if you can indulge us a little bit, you had immigrated
Yeah.
from Bhutan. Can you tell us a little bit about that? A very tumultuous time period.
Well, I wasn't in Bhutan at that time. I was in India. I had been in India since I met my wife back in 1993. And as you know, in India, I mean, Tibetans are considered refugees, and they're not. There's no. I mean, they did not have a path to citizenship. So even if we did businesses in India, we always had an Indian partner to do businesses with. So you could never have a bigger business or have own property and stuff like that. And Yangchen was a politician. She was the first woman general secretary of the Tibetan Youth Congress, which is the
Big deal.
Yeah, it is the largest organization of the Tibetans in exile. And so after her, there were a lot more other women, but I mean, she was a pathfinder, a trailblazer. So she was very vocal in her politics, and that's how, we got into problems, being physically attacked and being targeted time and again because of the activities that she was involved in. And I mean, I cannot say for sure who they are, but I mean, it's my gut tells me that they're agents of the Chinese government, or it's possible it might be, certain other factions also, but my gut tells me that these are agents of the Chinese government. And back in 2012, we even had an incident here. That was when I had the store next door. Also, we had that the little store that we had of Tibetan goods and stuff. And then we had just opened the restaurant also. And a Chinese woman attacked her, came to the store and attacked her.
No kidding.
Yep. And there was a guy in a car waiting outside, the getaway car with the engine running. I wasn't there. And Yangchen is such a person. If you slap her on one cheek, she'll give you the other one. You slap that one, she'll give you the other one. Because she follows, down to the basic teachings of His Holiness and the Buddha. She would not hurt an insect. So, but I'm not made that way. And when I came half an hour, and when I was told that, believe me, I drove around town looking for that car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so that happened here too.
That's insane. I mean, it sounds like espionage.
More or less. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. And I think the reason they're doing that is because Yangchen and I have been, with the support of our community, we've been doing all these arts festivals. And there's nothing political about it. We're just sharing the beauty of art with our community members. But we have to remember, on the other side, the Chinese are trying to eradicate that.
Right.
They're trying to change that completely. So, and we're trying to maintain the old form of Tibetan traditional art, which would be a shame if we let it die, because this is like centuries and centuries old of historical art.
So tell us a little bit about someone who left political persecution, who came here, who you're still dealing with having to kind of have something in the back of your head, thinking, well, they're still after us. There's still a target on my back. I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, it looks like you've got a strong enough community here to where you feel safe and the communities come together, but tell us a little bit about how that makes you feel.
Well, the thing is, the one thing that we have to remember about what the Chinese are doing, I mean, not the Chinese people, Don't get me wrong.
Sure,
Here.
absolutely.
It is absolutely the Central Communist Party of China that is doing all this. You have to remember that the Tibetan culture, Tibetan religion, Tibetan spirituality is Tibet's identity. Now, if you take that away, Tibet ceases to exist. And that is exactly what they're trying to achieve. Nowadays, if you look at the different forms of Tibetan dances that they have, which has been Sinonized, the Chinese version of it, you'll see it's very different from the actual Tibetan version of it. So what they're trying to do is change that so that they can have this complete control, and the demand for Tibet's independence or even autonomy from China ceases to exist. And to make that cease, they have to eradicate the Tibetan identity itself, which is its culture, its art, its traditions, its religion, its spirituality. So this is what they're trying to do. And it's an area that they will fail, because I think Tibetans are much stronger.
I mean, it seems so foreign to me, but at the same time, looking back at our own history, we did similar things with the Native American culture in this country. So I guess it's not that crazy to think about when you think about it like that. So let's get back to the restaurant and the arts festival, because I think those are beautiful places where you celebrate love and kindness and community and culture. So 78 Margaret Street, it's a warm, colorful, inviting atmosphere, Tibetan prayer flags, artwork adorning the walls. Tell us a little bit about how that came together, who designed it, the menu. Just give our listeners a little bit of a flavor as to what they should expect when they walk into the Himalaya, and then eventually when they walk into Cafe Himalaya.
Well, Yangchen and I, when we were working down in the city, both of us, when we decided to move in 2007 and we moved to Plattsburgh in 2008, we've always wanted to have a restaurant, because Yangchen is also somebody who likes meeting people, just like me. We like meeting people, we like making friends, and we feel that meeting more people gives us more knowledge. More knowledge means more power, more control over your emotions, over your own life. And for us being immigrants, coming into a country, and that we are, the easiest way of introducing ourselves to the community that we've chosen to live in is by presenting the beautiful forms of traditions and arts that we have. Because to me and Yangchen and to my family, art is something that's so beautiful that it doesn't have to speak. It's just the visual effect speaks for itself. So when we the restaurant, it used to be before the restaurant we had the store, and there too, we brought in things that were from Nepal, from India, from Bhutan, and these were all from refugee self-help centers, single-person businesses. We were supporting them by buying it from them and selling it here. And we had a variety of things that were beautiful to look at, and you just didn't have to feel it, or you don't have to look at the label where it's made in. It just spoke for itself and why it is beautiful. And then we had certain things, we had stories behind how they were made and who they were made by. So we had stuff that were being made by individuals or, a couple of people, and we could actually put a name to where it's made in. And the next door used to be Coffee Camp. And when that Coffee Camp, they closed down, it became free. My landlord, Dave Merkel, asked me, do you want to take it? I said, yeah. So we took it over, and then most of the design concept is Yangchen and mine. Mostly her. She's more artistic than I am. And the painting itself is all done by a monk friend of ours who was here with us for about a year and a half. So he painted all that, and he says, because he asked us, what do you want? So he said, whenever we go to a restaurant, you can hardly hear yourselves because you have to talk over somebody else's voice. So we wanted a space where as soon as you enter, it should give you a feeling of calmness that should come around you, a relaxation that comes around you. And visually, anything that is there, it should speak for itself and say, calm down. So that's what we wanted. And then the monks, he came up with different designs and different ideas. And so we, three of us got together, agreed on all those things we have. And then, and that's how we did that whole thing.
Yeah.
And then I had my friend Sonam Zoksang, who's a Tibetan photographer, who provided us with, photographs from his trips to Tibet. These are like, back from the 1980s. And then the color concept and things like that. So, and it's been like, it's been a process. But as far as the food is concerned, Yangchen and I had already decided what we wanted to do. And we made it a point that, it is going to be exactly how we make it at home. We are not going to do anything that is commercial restaurant style. We're going to do everything that we do at home. Anything that we do will be handmade. Every dish will be individually made. We will not have bulk made dishes. So this is something that we decided. And then as we came, as we went around the years, we added a few things, took away a few things that people don't like. And then, over the years, we've been trying to add specials, but people still will not eat it because they're so used to eating what they're eating, and I have people who've been eating the same dish for the last 7, 8 years, and they will not change. So, it's...
Guilty. I'm one of those people who, once I find something I like at a restaurant, I tend to just
stick to that.
Stick with it.
Yeah, so
if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, for our listeners who may not be familiar with Tibetan food, it seems to be largely influenced, and I'm not a foodie by any stretch of the imagination, by India a little bit, as far as chickpeas and spices and pronounced spices, flatbreads. Can you tell our listeners a little bit?
We have food from 3 different areas. It's Tibet, Bhutan, and Nepal. And these are the influences that Yangchen and I have had in our lives. Like Yangchen is Tibetan, I'm Bhutanese. I've had a lot of Nepalese influence in my life because we had a lot of Nepalese working for my dad, and and my granddad also, because they were in the construction business. So, these are the influences that we had. So we took that and we kind of like twisted it around a little bit, played with a little bit, and we brought it to where Yangchen and I like the food, and that's how we make it at home. So, but if you compare the food, like, when you're talking about the flatbreads and you're talking about the spices, that is food from Nepal. And the food from Nepal is very, very similar to Indian food. It uses spices that are the same as the Indian spices, but it uses it at a much lower level. And then if you think about food from Bhutan, Bhutan is the land of chilies. They eat very, very hot food. Okay. Now, Tibet is the opposite. And in Bhutan, you eat a lot of rice and a lot of chilies, while in Tibet, you eat a lot of flour. So it's a gluten place. So everything is like bread and different kinds of breads you have. Then, the most popular dish we have is the momos. Everybody likes the momos. So a lot of dough, but not that much of chilies. So these are very, very different. And then Bhutan, again, you have a lot of cheese in Bhutan. People like to eat a lot of cheese in Bhutan. So
I'm sure a lot of Americans love that aspect. So you process.
But in Bhutan, we don't like eat just cheese like that. It's always cooked with something to eat. So it's a little more healthier rather than just eating a lot of cheese.
All right. So let's talk about the restaurant then. So what are your hours for our listeners now who are no doubt very hungry? What's the best way to find you? Do you take reservations? I think we mentioned 78 Margaret Street, so right down in the center of Merkel's. I think was the old Merkel's.
Yep, that's the Merkel's building, and he still owns it, Dave Merkel. We open Tuesday to Saturday. We do lunch from 11 to 2. Then we close down in between, and then we open back up again 5 o'clock and close at 9 o'clock. And during lunch, of course, you don't need reservations unless we have a huge event or something like that, which is not very common, but does happen. But during dinner, it's Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. Dinners seem to be our most busiest nights when you might want to make a reservation. Okay. Especially if you're in a large group, we would definitely appreciate a reservation, because you're not going to find space for 10, 12 people. It's so I mean, most of my customers who know us by now, if they have a group of 6 or more coming, they always make a reservation. So
Yeah, so think ahead, because
think ahead.
especially you've got a big party there. Because
Yeah.
no, it's a beautiful atmosphere, great food, and like you said, the atmosphere. Your Tenzin and his wife most likely are going to come to your table. They're going to talk to you. They're going to figure out how you're doing, and it's a great experience. Tenzin and his wife, I think, for those who have experienced, it's just a wonderful experience to go and to just enjoy the wonderful cuisine and atmosphere. So, on that note, I wanted to talk a little bit about art. You had mentioned it, so. Amy Guglielmo was a guest on this show, and I think she played a part in the Tibetan Mandala, which is not too far away from your restaurant down on City Hall Place. Did you have anything to do with that? That Tibetan art, was that part of an unveiling during a festival? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, this was the festival that we did together with Mountain Lake PBS as the lead partner in it. But we had other partners, which were the SUNY Plattsburgh. Then we had the Strand Center. We had the Downtown Revitalization Initiative. I think that was Julia Devine.
Downtown Rising, maybe?
Downtown Rising, yeah.
Yep.
We had Downtown Rising too. And I would give most credit to Janine Charlene. Janine was working for PBS at that time, and she wrote the grant for that 1 year, almost a year of different different programs within the Tibetan Arts Festival. So the documentary that Mountain Lake PBS did is also a part of that whole 8-9 month long festival that we had.
And for our listeners, if you hadn't had a chance to check out the Arts in Exile documentary, it's absolutely worth watching. It's very well done. I love a lot of the long form and in fact short form productions from Mountain Lake PBS, and couldn't be a bigger a fan of all that. And so let's talk about a little bit more of arts. So the Champlain International Film Festival recognized you in 2016. With its first annual Mandala Award. The award is given to a community member who best represents the festival's values of kindness, decency, and love. What did it mean to get that award? And I guess before we do that, maybe we should back up a little bit and talk about the environment in which this happened. I believe it was November 2016 when you received the award. That time and should come to our listeners' forefront as being right after the 2016 election, which we've referenced. So, and I certainly saw it to a certain extent after the election of Donald Trump, where it seemed like certain people seemed more emboldened to do certain things, and it didn't really hit me at the time, but even just driving around, if someone had felt that you had slighted them in some small way, people would get out of their cars and start yelling. I just felt like the atmosphere was so much more toxic and kind of just confrontational after that election of 2016. But you personally bore the brunt of multiple occasions where individuals would threaten you to a certain extent. Talk about how you dealt with that and the community coming together, because I was one of the people, just to go ahead quickly, who came together to help celebrate Himalaya afterwards. There was a huge community gathering. I think it was Diana Gulia got a whole bunch of business cards, put them together, and the community just came together in just a beautiful way to celebrate what you had done to the community and to show our generosity and thankfulness that you've been and continue to be such an important part of our community. So can you talk about kind of how you felt after that happened and how the community kind of came together to help support you through that process?
Well, I think this.
And then ultimately, the cherry on top was the Film Festival Award.
Yeah. Kind of like I would be the first one to acknowledge that racism to a certain extent exists in every society. You can't escape it. It does exist. And at a certain stage in life, I myself might have said something racist. It happens. But this is on November 17th, after the election, I was at Walmart I don't know, I can't even remember what I had gone there to get. I mean, it's.
I try to avoid Walmart.
I do, but I think Walmart was the only place that had it, and I had to go there.
That's happened to me,
And
yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So as I parked my car and I was heading towards Walmart, and it was getting dark, and there was a couple of people. I think they were drinking. I mean, I'm not too sure, but there were two trucks, and they were outside the truck, and boisterous and loud, and so when they saw me, I mean, I think it was just I'm not the same as them. They're as white as they come, and I am as brown as you can get. So they started hurling. I mean, no provocation, nothing. I just parked the car and I was heading towards thing. I mean, they just started like hurling insults, and and I just I looked at them, and I was startled. I mean, I wasn't expecting it, but I looked at them and I just said, just avoid saying anything, doing anything. Just walk towards Walmart. And as I was walking towards Walmart, there was this other old elderly gentleman, and a woman, and they said some very, very nasty racist things, which I think it just emboldened them. And I wasn't terrified as such. I was in shock. I mean, that was the last thing that I expected was that, somebody that would be very aggressively confrontational based on my physical outlook,
And Zach Hirsch did some really good reporting
Yes.
around this incident. So check out the NCPR articles that Zach did, even including a follow-up.
Yep, he did.
But yeah, I mean, just you're not a very threatening or imposing guy, and just the fact that you're just minding your own business, and they just felt emboldened. I think what really stuck out to me was even the age. The elderly people. A lot of us think. My wife and I were like, oh, look at the cute elderly couple holding their hands. We're like, oh, great. And then to have those people kind of do the same insults that maybe you almost expect from younger men.
I mean, the other ones who were in the truck, I think they were much younger. I mean, they may be middle-aged or something like that. So, that is something that I would have. But what shocked me was, just elderly people actually coming out that age, and what was scary was the thought that they had this bottled inside them for so many decades, And then this did happen, a couple of more times. My car got vandalized, and I was shown the finger by a lot more, and that was the time when I mean, if you read Zach's article, I contemplated on protecting my family by getting a gun, and I think that was the stupidest thing that I could have ever thought about. Because, I mean, it's how could I even bring myself to think of that? I mean, it's.
I did want to touch on that, and we'll probably end with that just very quickly because, yeah, I've the North Country is a very gun-friendly place. I think we all know that. Yeah. I historically have been. I guess technically I'm a gun owner. My grandfather had a gun, which I now in possession of. But I'm not a gun person. I'm very much a gun rights or gun control advocate. Obviously, we need to protect gun rights, but I think some of the lines get pretty blurred. But yeah, I just thought that was fascinating because you kind of in the first article said, well, now I'm really thinking about it. You were very clearly struggling with yourself with that decision, and ultimately you came to the point where the community kind of rallied together, and you said, listen, I've got strength in my community. I don't necessarily need it here because I do a lot of research on this. I think it's still an open question whether or not having a gun in the house is more likely to, protect yourself from an intruder, or more likely to be, something that your family or an accident could happen. And I tend to find myself on the second half of that. But I just thought it was a beautiful follow-up, and I'll just quote you here. I got around to thinking, and then my community members, of course, they've been very supportive on Facebook. I had the community members come to me and say, Tenzin, we're behind you all the way. And when I look at that support, then I do not feel the need to bear any kind of firearms because that is my firearm.
It's kind of like, I initially struggled with myself, and then I think it was just on the spur of the moment that I said, okay, I'm going to go get a gun because these guys are likely to have guns, and if they come to my house, then I have something to protect myself and my family. But then the more I thought about it is, am I capable of shooting somebody? That is the first question I asked myself. Even if somebody shot at you, do you think you're capable of pulling the trigger on the other person? And then the more I asked myself, And the more I thought about it, I knew I would not be able to pull the trigger.
And your
So
your faith, did that help inform that decision?
I think it's not only my faith. I think it's I would say more on my own personal capabilities, but I guess it would be my spirituality side of things. No, the teachings that I follow, and it's just my own character, my own nature. Would I be able to do it? It's just. And the more I asked myself, and different questions, different scenarios, and the more I found myself, saying, "No, I can't do that."
I mean, yeah, as a criminal defense attorney who deals with crime on a fairly regular basis, you can kind of get caught into these traps of maybe over anticipating how dangerous your community or your area is. I think sometimes we do that, but no. Now with a 16, almost 17-month-old in the house, I mean, I thought about it even just writing this outline for the interview about the gun debate and how comfortable I would feel, and it's just complicated, right? Where do you keep the gun? Yeah. And if someone comes in, do you have enough time to figure out the lock and to get? I mean. So anyway, I'm very, very happy that you did come down on that, and I think unfortunately, once you get into those types of fear-based arguments, then it kind of just it denigrates the society a little bit, and I think it almost allows the fear-mongers to win to a certain extent. So
yeah, that's what I felt, and that's the reason. I mean, I just put it on Facebook, and I said social media. Let me see what my friends think about it. So I put it out to my friends and my community. I put it out there, and the amount of support that I got, and this is not just from Plattsburgh, my own community, but from all over the United States. I got messages, I got emails, I got letters, I got cards from all over. And when all this kept on happening, and I said, and then this was an immediate response on social media, and I said, if I have that amount of support, rather than me having a gun, all I have to do is use the phone as my weapon and just call the police or call my neighbor or call somebody, and I'll have hundreds of people just surrounding my house to protect me. And so when I have that kind of support, what need of a gun do I have? A gun that I'm not even capable of pulling the trigger on. So, and that was, that brought me down to my right senses, saying that I don't need to be aggressive as they are aggressive. And then, the more I thought about it, and the more time passed, and you think of the ways that you can combat that disease. It's a disease of that feeling of superiority just because of the color of your skin, not because of your capabilities as a human being, but just because you have that color of skin that makes you feel that makes you feel superior to the other one. So the more I thought about it, it is, saying the easiest way to, get across and be friends with these guys who hate you now is by actually talking to them, having a conversation with them, and seeing what their fear is, seeing, finding out what the root of that hate is. And if you can have a discussion, if you can have a civil dialogue, that is more lethal than any firearm that you have, because that word can spread. A firearm means you take, one bullet goes through somebody's body, kills that person, and that sets off a chain of events that affects a lot more people than just that one person. So so that's my eventual thought is that I want nothing to do with guns, and I believe that people should have the right to own what they want to own.
Absolutely.
But there should be sensible gun control laws. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I can tell you my common sense tells me that the Second Amendment was written at a time when you had a musket,
Even Antonin Scalia, addresses that in the Heller decision, I believe it is, D.C. versus Heller. But anyway, I did want to just finish up here by talking and highlighting Cafe Himalaya, because we do innovation here. You're innovating. You took up the old Conroy Organics, and I think you're doing some really cool stuff up there at 8173 Route 9, to be exact, in West Shazy. So it looks like you're doing community events, wellness, yoga. Can you talk briefly about what's going on there? Is Yangchen helping out?
Well, Yangchen is the lead on that. Our intentions have always been, I mean, you can see that, although we are running a restaurant there, the restaurant is actually paying for the rent and the utilities and stuff like that. But my Yangchen's and my eventual aim from the beginning is to convert that into a spiritual wellness center. And I've talked with a lot of people, and I know exactly what I want to do. And everybody likes the idea of having, this is not going to be based on one faith. This is going to be any faith.
Inclusive.
So, everything inclusive. And
even atheists?
Even atheists, they're welcome too. I mean, certain, like His Holiness says, even you can learn from atheists. We can learn from everybody, as long as we are willing to learn. So our goal now is to convert that into the center, a spiritual wellness center. And, that's provided we get the funds, which I am now writing a project to raise funds eventually, initially from the community, and then see if there's some grants available that'll help us, because this is going to be a peace initiative, a dialogue for peace and compassion. I want people to be able to come there irrespective of their background, irrespective of their education, irrespective of their faith, where we can all sit down and talk about different faiths, what we can learn from each other, how we can help each other, how we can spread the message of compassion and love. And if somebody is sick, how we can provide community-based support of providing that person with the support that he or she needs in terms of alternate medicine. We have a lot of people here with mental illnesses. Mental illnesses is being combated with use of even more chemicals. And those chemicals may be helpful to a certain extent, but then there are alternate methods that have been used for centuries before chemicals came into existence.
Oh, I do.
So
that stuff can get a little bit controversial too, because I'm listening to some really interesting. I think you're referencing SSRIs or some of those things for chemical imbalances. There haven't been much developments in the mental health field, and I'm doing a Spark Coalition mini-series on the opioid epidemic, and I'm getting into some of these very deep issues. But I think you're 100% on point there, is that we've kind of we've used chemicals to kind of and pharmaceutical companies, not natural. I think there's some natural supplements or things that we can use much better. But I love what you're doing up there. So that's beautiful. You're looking to make it kind of a spiritual wellness center. And I think at this time in American society, we need wellness, we need health, and I think what you referenced at the outset of the gross national happiness. Maybe we should start taking a look at that, because I think being happy is
it's what when you're always chasing after something and you don't have time for anything, you're never going to be happy. So you have to stop that chase at some time. The chase does not end when you die. The chase ends when you're content, and we have to learn how to be content with what we have. Yet strive for success, but success that will benefit not just you as an individual, but success that will benefit your community, your immediate community, your family, your friends. That'll benefit all of them. And if we can find that success, we can find that happiness. We can find contentment. But right now, what we're doing is, in our society and most societies, we're just chasing after that elusive goal, and you don't know what that goal is, because you reach that, you find that goal, and you reach that goal, you're going to find another one. That chase never stops.
That's beautiful. So let's end it right there because I think we've had an amazing conversation. So thank you so much, Tenzin Dorje, for joining us today. So for our listeners, Tenzin runs the two businesses, so Facebook and social media. I'm guessing you're on.
Yep, thank you so much.
Check it out there. 78 Margaret Street up there in West Shazy, 8173. So thank you very much for our listeners for joining us. Our viewers, please just like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, keep the conversation going, because if Tenzin and I just have this conversation today in a vacuum, not much gets done. I mean, I feel a lot better. Hopefully Tenzin does, but if we keep the conversation going and we keep collaborating and building those networks, I think what we can accomplish here in the North Country is almost unlimited. So thanks so much for North Volume. Check out all of our stuff, www.northvolume.com, videos on YouTube, Waite Innovate on Instagram, Facebook, sometimes on Twitter. Looking forward to have everyone back for episode 45 of Waite Innovate, only at North Volume.